Nice.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
You should leave it there. You should leave it there for the whole time. Okay, so if you're just watching this video, this is our IDC 6001 Week 5 synchronous meeting. And Stephen, Nicole, and Jenna and Deborah are all with us. And I have a couple of things I'd like to talk about that that I can kind of tack on to the end, but or questions that I can ask that might bring up some important things. But before I do that, I'd like to kind of let the format be you guys' format in the beginning. So, is there anything that you want to talk about, D2L wise or plan wise for this week coming up, or stuff that you did last week to post the draft? I just want to open up the floor and see where any of you guys want to go.
I have nothing on my end.
Cool.
Our group spent about 3 days drafting back and forth before we posted it to share with everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
We were kind of hoping for a little more constructive feedback. We kind of thought people would tear it apart, kind of like you did. That's what we were hoping for.
I think that probably the thing that kept some people from doing that was all that language about don't go like grammar Nazi on anybody.
Yeah.
You know, like talk about content and structure and organization and stuff like that. And those are just, I mean, quite honestly, those are the kinds of editing or revising skills that I think that very few of us are trained to have. We're all trained to kind of like think like the red pen English teacher and go looking for, you know, hunting for missing commas and misspelled words, but we haven't had very good introductions, at least in my experience in formal schooling. We haven't had good introductions at looking at a piece of writing and kind of seeing it as like a bunch of floating ideas and then being able to say, you know, like it doesn't matter whether this sentence is a complete sentence or not. Really, what I want to talk about is how we should start in a different place than we do and get to this thing in a different way. And I think that's probably those are the ideal kind of comments that we would have gotten this weekend. But I agree with you that people are less they feel less comfortable doing that.
I think we had the same stuff happen with our semester last year as well. So I didn't see really any change this semester.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think too. You know, we've all been running that gauntlet, and you know, we can feel each other's pain. So, you know, it's you know, after like reading some of those things, it was you know, kind of an eye opener. But I mean, I think this past week, I mean, I know for our group, things kind of began to gel so much, a little bit more, because I remember the first assignment, and I spent almost all day just obsessing over it, and then, you know, this last one, it's, you know, I can knock this out pretty quick. You know, I just sit down for an hour or so, and I was able to, you know, become pretty effective with it, and you know, our lines of communication were a lot better too. So I think it's just, you know, that there's a learning curve on this stuff, and it's pretty steep. But you know, once you kind of get your sea legs underneath you, you know, things begin to flow.
Cool. That sounds good. What's up, Oland?
Hey, Ari, sorry I'm late there.
Oh, no worries. This was the only kind of like quote-unquote mandatory attendees here were Steve and Nicole that signed up for this time. So whenever and this is for anybody watching this now or later, I'll always send an invite to my whole kind of IDC 6001 circle on Google+, just in case you want to jump in. But I don't want you to feel obligated. So Oland, if you're you know, like putting together a really awesome puzzle or something like that, I don't want this hangout to interrupt with anything that you're doing.
Is that an old guy crack? Is that what old guys
Oh my gosh. No. No.
Oh
Not unless I'm cracking on myself, because I also...
Sadly, I'm not as old as I look.
Oh man, I'm feeling older, really old all the time.
I got an AARP invitation yesterday in the mail.
What?
My husband told me it's because I've been crocheting too much. They caught on.
Yeah.
Words out.
It's probably just going through your like Gmail spam, like your Gmail's reading all of your emails and then it's saying, "Huh, she's mentioned knitting 3 times this week. Send her one of those AARP cards." Okay, so let me just check in with everybody else. Deborah, do you have kind of like lingering questions or worries or concerns or anything like that?
Not really any questions right now. I think my the trouble I had with the project was I felt like I probably would have been better off knowing all the different products. We each took one software product to research, and because the companies word things in different ways to try to make themselves stand out from the others, it was hard to know whether we were comparing exactly the same thing. So I guess one thing I learned is that maybe next time I would rather, for myself, kind of look into each one of the software companies that we were debating, so I would kind of know what meshed with each company.
Yeah, and I've realized in the last 2 weeks that doing this again, I will front load the idea that though this seems like it could be a tech research assignment, it's not. And I think that I worried that at least this week when I saw some of the stuff, I worried that people really spent more time than they needed to. I mean, I did like how I assumed this was fictional, but I did like how one of the memos was like, well, we took these out in the field and we tested them.
Yeah.
And, like, I was just imagining this like video of all 3 of those guys like throwing phones on the ground and driving over them and stuff like that. Yeah, and that nobody needed to do that, but it was that was a funny, useful device.
Yeah, it worked. It made it very interesting to read.
Yeah. So Jenny, you said no. Olin, do you have specific questions that you want to address?
No, I really just wanted to hop in and listen in there.
Cool.
I wasn't sure what our options were as far as that. Is there another address if we wanted to just listen in? Or is this the best option?
This would be a good time for us to test that. Olin, if you want to pop out and look at this and then come back and tell us what you find, I can dump my YouTube channel. Theoretically, this should be broadcasting live on my YouTube channel.
Actually, I have that up in my lap here on the other computer.
Do you? Okay.
Is there some option on there I should be choosing?
Yeah, and because I'm always like running this thing and never like watching it myself. I don't know where you would go to find that. That's a research project for somebody to do this week to figure out where the link is to be able to just watch. I feel like that should be easier to get to, but I'm not going to get dragged into that yet. Oland, though, he and I had some conversation this week about something that I mentioned probably to that everybody saw the emails that came out last week. The idea, and this is one of the things I wanted to talk about, the idea about quizzes and how, it's been, like it would be at any point, it's been challenging to make sure that we're doing all the things that IDC 2001 is supposed to do, while at the same time I have one teaching style, and Dr. Palmer obviously has a different one, which is fine. I'm trying to kind of track as closely as I can with the things that she does, but I think that this week the quiz, obviously there's an attendance activity that is shaped like a quiz. So discounting that, I'm going to boost out a quiz probably, I think the due date was Friday, and I'll be writing it and putting it up probably like tomorrow. And so instead of borrowing the same kind of like quiz questions from the previous course, I'm going to be building it myself. Which brings up the point of how I think that moving forward, and this will be a good week for everybody to think about this. Moving forward, I would like this meeting, if it happens a little bit later in the week than the day after I post everything, to be a meeting where we actually talk about the things that are going to be on the quiz, or the things that are difficult for people in the readings, and so the synchronous meeting is kind of like the pre-test or the studying or the conversation that precedes the quiz, because I really do, I think that it's good for us to talk a little bit about what we're learning before we dump into that kind of an activity. And my quiz questions are just going to be shaped a little bit differently, I think. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Another thing I'll say about the quiz, about just how quizzes work in general in D2L, edit whatever else I want to say about D2L, that I haven't figured out exactly a way to keep the quiz from sending you like the robot grade. And so this is the time that will count for the rest of the semester that I'll say that that there won't be a quiz that I don't have to go in and put my human eyes on. So whatever grade that thing gives you when you're looking at it, right after you've taken it, just assume that that's a robot that isn't and I'm going to come behind it and evaluate it myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
Is there any possible way that after we take a quiz, we can go back in another time after we've already gotten out of it to see what we've gotten wrong?
Yeah, you brought that up. You brought that up this week, and that's something that I've been meaning to get with our D2L people about. Because all of that data should be in there.
Yeah, and we just never had access to that before. I don't know if there just needs to be a button to switch over, or because I like to look back and say, okay, this is what I got wrong, and why did I get it wrong?
Yep. Yeah.
Especially when we get to like the citation stuff, that's really what would help.
Yeah. Okay. I will. I'll try to make that work before we get to that stuff at least. Anything else that you want to say about that? Everybody else, quizzes.
You know, Dr. Pete, as I think about it, I know I had I had at least like one quiz or test last semester where it was all short answer. There's no way to automate that.
Right.
So I know it was, I think for that class I had Professor Ming Yang in IT. Maybe reach out to him, just find out. I'm sure he could tell you exactly how he did that, where it was all short answer, and he had to eyeball every one of those questions.
Yep.
Yeah, all the quizzes I've taken that were like that, it just didn't give me a grade. It was just you've done your attempt at the end.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I want. That's what I want D2L to do. The issue. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do that. Let's talk about Chapter 4 is what we're looking at in Cone this week. And I did have a couple of things that I wanted to kind of clarify or talk about so that you kind of knew what to look for. Before we do that, though, it is worth kind of getting feedback on how reading something like Cone differs drastically from reading something like Anderson. And if you find yourself reading the text differently, and by reading the text I mean like reading it at a different time of the day, or making sure that you have paper and pencil next to you, or really strong cup of coffee. Like, is there a way that you go? Is there a way that you pick up a Cone book now that's different, or am I imagining that it's way more arduous than it actually is?
Oh, it takes me 10 times longer to read 10 pages in Cone that it does in Anderson. You can scan through Anderson and Cone. I'm pretty much rewriting the whole book just to focus.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the same thing on my end. I find the other two books to be a lot easier to read, but with the Colon one is just I have to reread it and reread it.
Mm-hmm. It's really technical, and I always have to imagine. Oh, Jessica's sending me an email. She thinks she's in the Hangout. Maybe she's in the Hangout. Hold on 1 second.
Dr. Pete, you kind of sound like a synthesizer right now. I don't know if you're breaking up or if it's my computer.
Yeah, I started getting a little bit of glitchiness myself too in the last minute or two. Is it clearing up? Or is it still coming in strange?
No, you still sound kind of like Kanye West with that vibrato right there.
Yeah.
You're a lyrical genius, Dr. Pete. We knew it.
Let me go check something that may be interrupting that. Hold on.
Jenna, while we're waiting, let's see the dog.
He's sick. Did you see him?
Yes.
Somebody got him some chocolate. So, this is Bentley.
Yeah.
Hi, Bentley.
Beauty.
So Jessica and maybe at least one other person had a question about what these projects are supposed to be shaped like at the end of the semester. And I wanted to talk briefly about two of them that I pulled out of last semester and just kind of give some examples of how those things worked. One, basically, the kind of overarching idea is that you are, in a much kind of larger, more developed way than the thing that you've just done, you are kind of conducting a researched study on a project or initiative or potentially even a product and recommending it to some institutional group. Either that might be a company, it might be a nonprofit organization, it might be a university. So the two that I looked at, one was recommending the use of a particular piece of software to the SPSU instructional design unit, that they should consider the use of this tool that they currently don't use. And another one was an analysis of music therapy and the recommendation to a specific either a health department or a nonprofit organization in a completely different town. I guess we're all in different towns, but in Asheville, North Carolina, that this music therapy or music education program would be good for that nonprofit organization. Mm-hmm. And so those are just kind of like captured examples, and if you want, by the next time we do this, I can look at them all and I can give you some other examples. But ideally, your report is one in which you are choosing to recommend something after a considerable period of kind of like researching that thing. And the recommendation of that thing should be to an actual kind of institution, whether that's a company, an office of the government, a nonprofit organization, or something like that. So that's very broad, and there's definitely more specific language coming down the pike about that, like it has to fall under these guidelines or whatever. But also within the language that I put up last night are the kind of banned topics, the topics that are not good choices for this kind of work. So maybe even at looking at those kind of gives you an idea about how where not to go, at least. But what about, do you guys have questions about that whole thing? I mean, keep in mind, though, that the discussion post that's asking you to to kind of do some brainstorming about what you might choose for this project at the end of the semester, it sits between week 5 and week 6, so that you don't have to finish that until, you don't have to do that part until next week if you're still kind of like wading through whatever stuff that we're doing, if you want to get finished with this recommendation report first.
Do we have to go through a discussion post, or do we also have to do a memo?
I think the memo goes into the discussion post.
Okay.
So you said that you wanted the research report or the idea by at least the beginning of next week, but what if we change our minds?
You should be free to change your mind. This is just the beginning of a conversation about what that might look like, and because everybody will be posting them where everyone else can see them, we'll be able to have kind of like a kind of round, rich conversation about, and that's actually one that I'm really looking forward to for this kind of meeting, is to be able to say, Jenna says this, Steve says this, Deborah says this, Olin says this. Let's talk about what the difficult parts of this project might be. Let's talk about what the obstacles are going to be. So you're not pouring concrete around it at this point at all.
And so you also said in the directions about probably refraining from it being in regards to your work.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, in my work, there's a machine that I think, well, there's a machine we already have, and it needs to be replaced at some point. And I thought, well, okay, what if I researched the different options and then gave them the options, because I really don't care which machine they get.
Right.
Right. It's usable. So I thought of that, but I didn't know if that would be banned.
That would, I guess, that would potentially fall under. Well, I'm looking at the banned topics, and the majority, and again, you know, this is language that comes straight from Dr. Palmer, and so she's been doing this longer than I have in this assignment. Most of them have to do with biting off more than you can chew. Did you see one in there, Deborah, that I'm not seeing that had to do with not doing something that has to do with your job?
I guess on the report topic, you said at the very beginning there's one caveat to this post. It can't start with "I'm going to recommend to my boss that we do something."
Right. Yeah. So okay, I see what you mean. The direction there is not don't recommend something to your boss. The direction there is don't start from the perspective of I know what I'm going to recommend.
Okay, that's what I figured. But then I just didn't know if you were extending it and thought maybe just stay away from your own individual workplace, or if that was.
No. I think that that's okay for you to do.
Okay.
Were I going to do this, and I definitely even might, I think that my report would be maybe we should consider other learning management systems.
Like not D2L.
Yeah. Right?
Actually, this is the third time I've seen it change in the last 5 years.
Other learning management systems. That would be the language that I put on it. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't front load that with we should definitely get rid of X learning management system and pick up Y. But I think it would be interesting to say, let's look at some other options. What would that process look like? So yeah, Deborah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that does. And cool. Then, just to elaborate on what you were saying earlier, the basis is that we're going to basically recommend some sort of product to a company or a nonprofit organization is kind of the general idea of it.
Yeah, I think that I would want to keep products out of that and put something more loose in there. Like it could be a product, it could be a process.
Oh, okay.
It could be the use of a particular batch of research, like this one that I talked about was the use of a particular kind of music therapy, or music education. Yeah, I mean, I think that a product is okay, but I don't want everyone restricted to that.
Okay.
And hopefully that answers. Let me see if Jessica has popped in and said that that's along the lines of what she's looking for. maybe she didn't know whether we popped back in. And just in closing, I'll just gesture towards this last Cone thing, this last thing from Chapter 4. I think one of the most important things that we can pay attention to when we look at this idea of coordination and subordination in Cone and any kind of like looking at grammatical structures is that there are code words that the English language and probably almost every language uses to say there are two distinct ideas in this sentence, and this idea is more important. It sits on top. And the difference between, and you guys will be able to see this, people watching won't be able to, the difference between something like this, are you guys able to see the chat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So the difference between a sentence like this, which is the dog ran and the cat sat still, and something like this, is structurally profound, because when you have a sentence like the dog ran and the cat sat still, you've got two equal parts. You've got coordination. There's no code, if we can think about code like DNA code or computer code, there's no grammar code in that first sentence that says one of these things is more important than the other one. But when you look at the second sentence, which is while the dog ran, the cat sat still, that word while has built into it grammar code that teaches the English reader, hearer, audience, whatever, that there is something else that's more important than this thing that I'm listening to right now. So that, I mean, that's the thing that keeps us from being able to walk up to somebody on the street and say something like, after it rains, you know, because the person will say, what? Like, you've given me the code that something else more important is coming, and you have to follow that up. So after it rains, in that little piece, which is actually, you know, like, it's got all the components that it needs to be a sentence. It's got a subject, it's got a verb, but it's got this code word at the beginning that says this is not the most important piece. It could be a sentence all by itself without the word after, but because I put after with it, you have to expect that something else is coming. And these sentences, after it rains, comma, I'm going to close the window, or the dog ran, the cat sat still, these are really like simple sentences, but when we get into things like Cone starts throwing at us, we see that all these code markers still work. So we're able to kind of pick out, in this sentence, this piece, this clause is dependent and it is subordinate to another clause. This clause is the clause that's driving the sentence. Even if that clause that's driving the sentence, the independent clause, comes second, it's not the case that the clause that comes first is the independent one. Sometimes the subordinate clause comes first. And the reason, and all of this sounds like maybe gobbledygook grammar speak, except that a studied reader wants an author to indicate very clearly that he or she knows that a piece is subordinate or that it is coordinate, which means that if the right conjunction isn't there or the right comma isn't there, a studied reader goes, this sentence is wonky, maybe because it just is missing a comma, but maybe also because the writer doesn't know how these two pieces relate to each other. And that's why it all becomes important, because gluing those two kind of components together the right way either gains you the trust of a studied reader or kind of earns you some frustration from that reader. So that was hopefully less than 3 minutes of a reflection on Cone and why I think that this chapter is really important.
I think you did a lot better job of explaining it than she did.
Well, I mean, I was taught grammar in 9th grade by someone that made us diagram sentences, and then when we learned a particular grammar concept and then we violated that concept in a paper that we wrote, we had to stand up on the desk and recite the rule that we broke 10 times.
Oh, wow.
And that was scarring and emotionally violent, but I definitely learned an appreciation for grammar, such that, you know, there's a way in which you can read a book like Coln, and if it really starts to sink in, if you really start to get what she's saying, that when you look at sentences, it ends up being like the Matrix, where you just see like the code. You like get at what every word is doing in every sentence. And when you have that kind of confidence with how language is working, then you're able to like rip through, you know, drafting and editing somebody else's work. It's just so much more clear because you don't have to go, I'm circling this word or this comma because I know that it's wrong, but I'm not really sure why it is. You want to be able to be the person that goes, you know what, I looked at this memo that you wrote and this word doesn't go here and here's why. That, you know, that's the kind of, I don't know, control or authority that knowing how to do this stuff gives us. The problem is that when people learn it and like embed it in their heads too hard, then it makes them feel like they should go around and correct everyone's grammar all the time, which is a whole other lesson about how this is just one code. There are many codes. There's the way that we talk to the police officer that pulls us over at 2 in the morning, and there's the way that we talk to our child, and there's the way that we talk to our friend, and nobody's going around and correcting those codes because those codes don't need correcting. Everybody understands what's going on. It's only in these kind of like formal professional and academic settings where there's a completely agreed upon code and not everybody knows kind of what the conventions are. Or when people don't know what the conventions are, then they suffer a kind of authority loss, an ethos loss. All right, I've talked way too long. We're almost at an hour. I really didn't want these to ever go longer than 45 minutes, so you guys should all chastise me the next time that we go over 30 minutes. And hopefully I'll have this glitchy internet issue worked out by next week. Any questions before we wrap up?
Not on my end.
No. On the E-prime stuff, do you want us to start writing that way?
I want you to start thinking about writing that way. I think that with any kind of device or trick like E-prime, you can apply it so hard that it really makes your writing strange. I don't, you know, the short answer to that question, Nicole, is I want you to start thinking about why writing that way is sometimes stronger.
I can see where it's beneficial, but sometimes you have to change like completely what you're saying to make it work.
Right.
To not use the word is.
That's true. That's true. And we need the word is. I mean, it's not like is a bad word. It's more like this. Think about a sentence that starts with the word there, T-H-E-R-E. There were 3 police cars in the road, or there was a time when I won an award. Whenever you start a sentence with the word there, you're automatically going to have to follow that up with a version of is, a version of to be. And when you do that, you've got the thing that's trying to act like the subject. There is not actually being the subject. You've got the thing that's trying to act like the subject and the thing that's the verb. And they're the most abstract versions of those things you could possibly have. And everything that's interesting in the sentence has been banished to the basement of the sentence. Does that mean that no one should ever start a sentence with the word there? No. But it means that we have learned to rely too much on sentences that we're used to speaking and not made the transition to the fact that when we're writing sentences that they really need to pop, because we're not standing there giving all the other communicative stuff that we're doing when we're talking. So in as much as we're able to put like a really sharp verb in a sentence, that's usually a good thing. But you're right, going through and removing every version of to be all the time, 24/7, not not necessarily going to improve everything. Other last-minute questions?
The final report, do you want it to still follow the 8th grade writing level?
The final report that we do at the end of the semester?
The one we were discussing, yeah, the research report?
Or the one this week?
No, I'm sorry, the research one. When you were saying with our readability statistics that we want to stay around the 8th grade writing level, is that still the case with the research paper?
I don't want to make a pronouncement on that. I honestly want to look more carefully at the guidelines that she puts in there for that. And since I haven't rolled, like, I don't know. I may change that before I roll it out. I think that was something to play with on this recommendation report this time. But the reason I'm hesitating is because depending on who your audience is, I mean, who your audience is should always determine that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And if you're writing to academics, if you're recommending a software for a department in a university, writing on an 8th grade level, not the best. Maybe. A really good way, this is the last thing I'm going to say, a really good way to pay attention to this readability thing is to look at a story in the New York Times and a story about the same thing in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And this is not to say that there's anything wrong with either of those two papers, but people that have run data on how readable those newspapers are will give you wildly different results on those two newspapers. So, and there's a reason for that. It has to do with audience. It has to do with who can we sell this paper to? Who are our legitimate customers? And who will advertise here? And the way that sentences are worded in the New York Times is just always going to be more complex and sophisticated and sometimes hard to read than sentences that we'll find in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And, I mean, they're both papers. They're both selling papers. So I guess that's my short little aside to say that I don't want to lock into the fact that that last thing should be on that level necessarily.
Okay.
Okay. All right. You guys have been troopers. Sorry we went so long. And I will be boosting out another. I think there's at least 1 or 2 people lined up for next week. But if you're watching this video after the fact and you haven't signed up for one of these yet, it would be great if you did. On this week, I'm going to release my availability for like the next 4 or 5 weeks, and people can already start kind of like ghosting out and grabbing them. And I mean, it would be good if everybody did this every once in a while. Hopefully, like once every 3 or 4 weeks. But I never want it to be the kind of thing where somebody goes, oh, I have to do that thing again every Monday night or every Tuesday night. Hopefully, it's something that kind of like puts human beings, a human face on the class, and hopefully it's not too arduous. So thanks again. And reach out to me this week if you have questions about things that are going on, and good luck getting all of your picky surgical editing things done this week on that informal recommendation report.
Thanks, Dr. Pete.
Thank you.
See you guys soon.